growing up in Brooklyn, Brooklyn Dodgers?
I know every one of them. I mean, Leo DeRozan, Charlie Dressen, but around Dolph Camilli, Pete Coscarot, Pee Wee Reese, Frenchie Bordegaray, Cookie Lavagetto, Babe Phelps, Mickey Owen. Knew the whole bunch. Whitlow Wyatt, Larry French. It was, of course, baseball was part of our lives then.
So did your dad take you to the games? Was that going to Abbotsfield?
Yes, we go to Abbotsfield. Well, it's funny. He was a member of the State Assembly for 6 years,
right,
and then in Congress, and then ultimately on the federal court for 30 years. And he said he had, his congressional district was the largest one in America, 425,000 people. And he said, these are my children.
Yep.
I have to take care of them. You know, war was on, and my brothers were in the service. I was too young for that. Civil Air Patrol, but that's all. It took me to a doubleheader at Ebbets Field, Memorial Day 1940. And Carl Hubble, the Dodgers lost 2 to the Giants. Carl Hubble threw a one-hitter. We sat right behind home plate. And he took me to another doubleheader in Labor Day 1945 against Boston. And I don't remember who won it. The Dodgers probably lost, as they did most every year.
Yeah.
Wait till next year, we'd say, until 55. But but those are the only times he could take me because he was so involved with his constituency. But as a member of the State Assembly, all the kids got a pass, maybe once a season, to the Knothole Club. Mm-hmm. And they get into the left field bleachers free. Well, he was in the State Assembly, so I got a ticket to every game. And I went, and it was great. It was just great.
As you close your eyes and look at Ebbets Field, describe it.
Well, 297 feet down the right field line, very short, but unlike the Polo Grounds where it was short and low, it was short and 40 feet tall. And the fence, which was half stone and half fence material, and then the big scoreboard. Underneath it, a sign, Abe Stark, who became the borough president of Brooklyn. He had a clothing factory, and it said, hit sign, win suit. Mm-hmm. So if the right fielder didn't get out there fast enough and your fly ball hit the sign, you won a suit. And went out to, I guess, 310 or so center field, where Pete Reiser, or Ernie Coy, a Native American, played, but then Pete Reiser played and ran into the wall and really hurt his career. And then left field with Ducky Medwick, and that was longer than right field, probably 320 or 340. And fans all around, but more than just fans, people who were so dedicated to the team, who knew every player. Was marvelous, absolutely marvelous. And then Mr. Rickey, nobody called him Branch, his name was Mr. Rickey. He brought in Jackie Robinson, and that was a momentous occasion. He was in Montreal for a year and then came to Brooklyn. Dad was involved in part of the welcoming of Jackie Robinson, and a number of things that the Dodgers asked for certain groups of citizens to help them with certain decisions as to whether a particular ball hit to a certain spot over center field was a home run or not. And he said something to him that, this is, I think, the first time it has gone public, that Jackie Robinson said to him, it's about Mr. Rickey, and if you don't mind my telling it, Robinson said, when I came up, Mr. Rickey said to me, Jackie, they're going to be, companies will be approaching you with all kinds of things they want to sell. Hair straighteners, skin lighteners, all kinds of ethnic things. Please, never take one of those ads. We will pay you for every single one. And Mr. Rickey and the Dodgers paid Jackie Robinson for every one of those ads he didn't take, to keep it the way it should have been, and the way it ultimately evolved. Instead of being some circus, it was baseball, and it was marvelous.
How'd you find in your neighborhood, as young kid, was there a buzz going on in 46 when he was signed, in 47 when he showed up? You know, do you remember any conversation among the kids?
Well, our street was the United Nations. There were no black people on the street, although we had black friends, and my dad had black captains in the political world. But we were Irish, Italian, Polish, Catholic, Protestant, Jew. It was an amazing street, and all got along famously, like the people at Desilu. It just was an amazing team. And so we were thrilled with having Jackie Robinson. I mean, there may have been individuals who were not, but we brought it, first of all, it was going to help the Dodgers win the pennant, and that was more important than anything else. But we really did welcome him into the team. Racial problems existed then throughout the city, as they did throughout the country. Yeah. One of my dad's captains was a woman named Rock. Her son, Curtis Rock, was the president of our senior class at James Madison High School. I was the treasurer. I think that's the only one they trusted with the money. When we had our senior prom, we went to the hotels in New York, and none of them would allow us to have the prom because the president of the class was black, or Negro, they were called then. They wouldn't allow us to go there. And I told my dad, and he went to the Waldorf Astoria, the manager of which he knew very well. And he said, I would urge you to have them. And we had the Waldorf Astoria, the best hotel in New York, for our prom. But it was because of the intercession of a man they respected and not feared, but respected. Sure. And so we had it. And happily things evolved, from that.
But your grandfather, just segueing into the neighborhood, I mean, you got to Brooklyn, really your grandfather was Latvia?
He came from Riga. He, 8 years old, he started to work in the lumber fields, rode the logs down the flume from the mountaintops into the sea, and as a teen had a baby, and went to London with his wife and child as a young teenager, and lived in the park in London. For a year they lived in the park, and then came to the States and became a strong, big man, and he was a lumberjack in the United States and in Canada, in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And then a rug weaver, a hod carrier, and then became a trolley car motorman. And the trolley cars then were extremely important because they were the only connection that different portions of the large borough of Brooklyn, it had been a city originally, they had. There were no automobiles. The telephone number was 8 when they first got a phone, and it became 87. And then when it had 3 numbers, the nearest house down the road, the man gave up his phone. He said, how can you remember 3 numbers? Really? But he went from one community to another in the horse-drawn cabs and was able to take information from one political leader to another. And so he became a political figure. And at the age of 40, he had a candy store, bought a candy store, and at the age of 40, with 8 children surviving out of 9, he went to law school and never set foot in a school in a day in his life. Wow. And he didn't have to go to college then to go to law school. Yeah. He was first in his class at law school. He spoke all the European languages and Hebrew and Arabic and Yiddish, all of those languages. And he became the court interpreter for the Magistrates Court in Brooklyn, New York, and then a magistrate, city magistrate, and on the Court of Special Sessions. He was a celebrated, deeply respected judge. But still remembered his origins, and was a man of great ethics. Well, the judges are supposed to be, and he was, Justice Jackson, but also wisdom. He had the wisdom of experience, of age. As my dad, one time I said to my dad, Dad, one witness says it was red, another one says it was blue. How do you know who's telling the truth? He said, I know. And he said, that's what experience is. Enough people tell you untruths, you get to know who's telling you the truth. And the Gramp was that way and was just marvelous. It's a wonderful tradition, something to be proud of.
Well, you're equally proud in your book of your dad.
Well, my dad, when he was nominated by President Truman for the bench, he spoke at his induction, and his first words were, it was easy for me. My father was a judge. Yeah. But he was a lawyer, and then during the Depression had some wonderful clients, but never charged them any money. He just, he found it very hard to do that. But he went to the State Assembly. Here's the kind of man he was. In the State Assembly, he sat for 6 years, 2-year terms. The first time he was nominated, 1938, his a man named Benjamin Brenner was the Republican candidate. Dad was a Democrat, but they were dear friends, all the political people, Republican, Democrat, they were all good friends. And they respected one another's beliefs. because they knew they were honorably held. So they had a debate, unlike the new one debates, but this was in a little community in Brooklyn. And Dad got up and he said, ladies and gentlemen, and he asked the moderator if he might say something, and he did. He said, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brenner and I have entered into a sidebar agreement, if you don't mind. I promised not to tell any lies about him, and he's promised not to tell the truth about me. And he used to win 80 to 20. I mean, there was never any problem. But he attended, in those days, if you went to Albany, there was like a 4-month session. And if you attended 20% of the roll calls, it was a lot. He never missed a roll call in 6 years until he had been nominated for Congress and knew he wouldn't be back. And on the last roll call, in April of the last year, they called his name and he didn't answer. And all his friends says, Leo, you've got to answer. It's 100%. You've got to answer. And he said, no, there's got to be a record that must be broken. And so he did not answer the roll call. It's the kind of guy that he was.
You mentioned a little bit that at some point, he and Jackson at least had some interface.
Well, I think when Dad was in Congress, he was in the Veterans Affairs Committee, but he was only there for 3 years because he was elected in '44 with President Roosevelt's last election, and then in '47 he was appointed to the bench. But he was influential, and he was, again, highly respected, and he had contact with him. And then later on as a justice, and there was a gentleman named Sachter, S-A-C-H-T-E-R, who's my dad's law firm. He was of counsel. And when Dad went on the bench, his former partner became the congressman. I wasn't old enough. I was still at college. And he became the congressman. And in the office was a gentleman who became, at one point, the legal secretary to the High Commissioner of Germany. And he was involved then. And I think that Dad, there was a connection there with him. But he knew a number of the justices. I think Tom Clark, when he came to New York, used to use my dad's chambers as his chambers. So he was close to those people. I wish he had been a Supreme Court justice, but he served on the bench though for 30 years, and he did. Is there enough tape for me to tell stories?
We're here for you.
Well, here's an example of the kind of judge he is. This is again an example of the wisdom which transcends the mere legalities. Mm-hmm. There was a black marketeer who had been caught and was arrested for he had made a vast sum of money. But he gave a young IRS agent $500 to allow him to file a false return and order it favorably. They were caught. Dad had the young man in front of him, and one of the other judges in the court, it was in the Eastern District in Brooklyn, New York, had the black marketeer. They pleaded guilty. The young man Dad had was a Roman Catholic, very, very active in Catholic charities, had a wife and a number of children, and was very active in the sports Catholic youth organization. The other man was Jewish, and we're Jewish, and the other judge was not. And in the elevator, the morning of the sentencing, each judge that was that day going to sentence the defendant, the judge said, Leo, waiting for the elevator. Leo, what are you going to do to this young man? And Dad said, well, it's very sad, but he has to go to jail. He said he swore an oath, and he didn't honor the oath, and it will be a 6-month sentence, but I have to sentence him to jail. What are you going to do with the black marketeer? And he said, well, Leo, I've had 200 letters from people telling me what a contributor he is to the synagogue and what a wonderful man he is. And what your brother-in-law wrote a letter to me about him, so I'm going to have to let him go. I'll just sentence him to probation. And my father looked at him and said, I'll tell you what, when your guy goes to jail, my guy goes to jail. And he sentenced him to probation and didn't put him in prison.
That's wisdom.
Yes, exactly. And ultimately, the only thing that ever really, really hurt my dad was when Vincent Keogh, J. Vincent Keogh, was the state Supreme Court justice, the brother of Congressman Keogh of the Keogh Plan. Right. And my grandfather had put Congressman Keogh into politics. And Bill O'Dwyer, the mayor of New York, my grandfather, he was a cop on the beat. My grandfather introduced him to politics. And so the Keoghs were very, very dear friends, and Dad used to have lunch every week at the Brooklyn Club, which Jewish people were not allowed to join then, but but they were Catholic, so they could join. So, but they'd have lunch at the club. And once Judge Keogh said, Leo, what are you going to do in the Sanford Moore case? He was a policeman who had given up that, and it was involved in the bankruptcy of a corporation that had gaming devices, or vending devices. And he took them from the bankrupt estate and shipped them to Europe, to England, and sold them over there. And he was pleaded guilty before my dad to the crime. And he said, Leo, what are you going to do to Sanford Moore? And he said he's going to go to jail. And Dad, it was hard for Dad to send someone to jail. He could have sentenced someone to death, but it was very hard to send a person to jail. And he would, anybody who wanted to speak in favor of personal right to him, he would listen, he would read, but not the day of sentencing, because that was very, very hard. But so a week or so before, Justice Keogh said, Leo, what are you going to do? And he said he's going to jail. Didn't say another word. In a restaurant in Long Island, the Chief Justice of the court, and Dad had served longest, but he was then too old to be the Chief Judge. The Chief Judge, the VAT, overheard a man at the next table talking, and someone said something about Sanford Moore, and he said, oh, I got the judge in my pocket. Judge Zavant said, Leo, I heard this man say he has the judge in his pocket. So they went to the FBI. And there was they found out that there was a guy named Dux Corallo, who was a well-known gangster. And an interim, a neighbor of his, who was like an intermediary, who testified. He was an orthopedic surgeon who never operated. He just testified in court cases all over the country. And on the day of sentencing, Judge Keogh, whose courthouse was right next to my dad's, called and said, Leo, this doctor is here, and he had testified before my father. He'd like to see him, and Dad didn't have any idea what it was about. Yeah. And the doctor came into the chambers, and he was being robed to go onto the bench. And he said, Judge, I'd like to talk to you about Sanford Moore. And my father said, he's going to jail. Get out of here. And but he knew the FBI had investigated this thing. And so he got up in court, and he said, I was going to sentence you to probation, but you're going to prison for 2 years. And they indicted Judge Keogh, State Supreme Court Justice, and Dux Corallo, and the doctor, Dr. Erdman. They indicted them all. And after a fairly long trial, my dad had to testify against his best friend. Yeah. And he had to say the truth. Sure. And of course, that lent the imprimatur. If a federal judge testified, whatever the jury believes about it, the whole case, that means that's the truth. And he testified, and that hurt very deeply. Sure. And his friend went to prison for that. But he was that kind of a guy. He was just a remarkable judge and a remarkable man. And it's so you feel so privileged to have had a grandfather and a father like that. It was just wonderful.
I really enjoyed your book because it being in memoirs, you're able to use incidents of people at my age as a young person. I couldn't help but respond to it. I'm just going to go through some names. I'm just going to drop names and reaction, but and you can tell some stories about it. Rudy Valley.
Well, he held me up for more money than we had paid. We paid other people because he wouldn't do the show unless I did that. But I couldn't pay him his salary, so I paid him his top of the show salary and a period consultation fee. He told me what about the 1930s. But he, if I may say it, he was the tightest person you ever met in your life. His wallet squeaked when he opened it. Just impossible. And he had the foulest mouth I have ever heard. And I cannot understand it. He was a nice man, a sweet man, a gentleman, but he would get into public places. He was arrested twice in airports by the federal authorities for his speech. After he did the show, he wanted Lucy to take him to dinner because he didn't want to pick up a check. But she wouldn't do that. She went off with Gary to their regular post-show dinner, and then it fell upon me to take him to dinner. So Eileen and I took him to Don the Beachcomber with his publicity assistant, who's still our dear friend, Valerie Nixon Florman. And we went to Don the Beachcomber in Hollywood, and he started talking words I could not believe. I mean, we all know the word, the locker room talk. I never heard such words in your life, out loud and gratuitously, every one of them. The management came over, and because he was still a star, I mean, he'd been in a long time, but he was still very well known. They didn't move us out of the restaurant, but they took every other table, all the people, and moved them to other rooms in the middle of their meals. Moved them so we had the whole room to ourselves. But that's the nature of the man. To this day, I don't think he had Tourette's syndrome, because we could be at parties together with a number of people and it wouldn't be a word. But in a public place, he could not help but speak that way.
Similar kind of a character flaw was Walter Matthau.
Well, no, gambling, Walter was family to us, dear friends. We had a house in the Adirondacks, family house that my father bought from my uncle. He bought it, by the way, 48 acres on a beautiful lake with a third of a mile of sandy beach. He bought it for $10,000. And he was an honest judge. He didn't have $10,000. They got $10,000 a year then. He paid $5,000 and a mortgage of $5,000. And later on, he gave Walter a piece of land next to ours. We hadn't built yet, but he gave Walter and Carol Matthau a piece, and they built the house. Actually, he had to sell it to them. It was inappropriate for him to give the parcel to someone. So for a few dollars, Walter bought it from him and built the house. And we were very much family. But he had a problem. He had to gamble every penny that he had. And he'd say, Howard, my pockets aren't empty. I don't feel good. We go to the racetrack. If there were 8 horses, he'd bet on 7 losers, and the 8th horse would win. We went to Saratoga, and we were near Saratoga racetrack, and he said, "You got to bet this. That's the Jewish jockey. He's the only Jewish jockey in all the sport, in all horse racing." So we bet on his horse, and he won, and he was disqualified for cheating. But that's show business. But Walter, we would bet on all the races. If we'd leave before that, we'd leave after the 7th race. Say, he would stop. This is in California at Hollywood Park or the tracks out there. Santa Anita. He would stop at a liquor store and call. But he couldn't talk directly to a bookmaker. They were afraid to have him talking directly to a bookmaker in case the bookmaker was being listened to by the authorities. Sure. So he would call a man who lived in Palm Springs, who would in turn call the bookmaker for him. He would bet on the races from driving home, get home, and in the middle of the basketball game, bet on the next shot, bet on every possible thing. And he did one thing, and this is, again, never made this public, although I mentioned it when I was interviewed yesterday by the Lucy Desi days. He had done a picture called Bad News Bears. And Paramount asked me, I was very close to the senior executives at Paramount. They said, would you please ask him, he wasn't going to do the sequel, but would you ask him to come in for one morning and just shoot a little scene where he introduces the picture, and then he explains why he's not going to Japan with the team. And speaking of baseball, it's a baseball team. Sure. And he says, they said, would you ask him to do it for $50,000? Just for the morning shoot. And we had a lunch at the Beverly Hills Tennis Club, and I remember the meal because we had lunch with Hank Greenberg.
There we go.
And to me, talk about a kid from Brooklyn, oh boy. But we had lunch, and I offered Walter this proposition, and he said, fine, I'll do it. 3 conditions. You don't tell William Morris, that was his agent. You don't tell the IRS, and you don't tell Carol, his wife. And I said, they usually kill the messenger. I said, I'll go back to Paramount and bring that message to Paramount. And he really meant that. He would have wanted us to slip him cash under the table. You can imagine Paramount doing that. And they said, thank you very much, but tell him to forget it. He never did that scene. But he was such an inveterate gambler. that he ultimately had heart attacks. Of course, he was with Dr. Kurland, who's the team doctor for the Lakers, and I think for the football team too in L.A. He was at the track with him when they had his second heart attack, and that saved his life. But he was. They ultimately wouldn't let him live up in the Adirondacks because even the horse racing season was only a month, but the trotters were there all year, and he would be every single day or evening at the track, gambling, and you have to lose, you know that.
Sure, absolutely.
Made millions and millions of dollars and lost it all.
You had a chance, I guess an almost chance, to be the attorney for Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah, what we did, my firm was, she was studying at the Actors Studio under the tutelage really of my sister-in-law, Maureen Stapleton. And when she and Joe DiMaggio were getting divorced, she needed a separate law firm, and Maureen recommended my law firm. I was a young lawyer then. She did it, and she recommended me, but the two partners in the law firm, they separated me from that because they wanted it all for themselves. But that's fine, it didn't matter. She was represented. The sad thing was that NBC offered her $1 million to play Miss Sadie Thompson, the Somerset Maugham character from the book Rain. And she was thrilled. It was, for her, it was a wonderful opportunity. She was a good actress. You see some like it on in some of the other pictures. And she really would have been marvelous in that role. And $1 million then for a television program, movie stars were getting $200,000 for a picture. She was going to get $1 million for TV. And I negotiated the contracts with NBC, and I put it on the partner's desk. They were happy when their clients weren't working. If their clients weren't working, there'd be no trouble. They'd be vacationing, going around the world, it didn't matter. But they didn't want her to be doing that. And for a year, it sat on his desk. And I would say, please get this back, have her sign it and send it back to NBC. And she died with it still sitting on his desk a year later. And it might have changed the whole picture. Sure. She might be today retired somewhere. But young lawyers, I would have to do a lot of housework for a lot of people. You had to fix their plumbing. You did for clients things that were not legal things. As you can mention, Huntington Hartford, was the A&P heir. And we represented him. He had other law firms for business things, but we represented his theatrical work. He produced pictures, he did produced plays. And he owned a yacht down in Miami. It was 100 feet long and 97 tons or vice versa. And it had a crew of 7 or 9 people on it all the time. And that was the Joseph Conrad. He was a great fan of Joseph Conrad's. And he wanted Errol Flynn's captain. When Errol Flynn died, he had a Captain Cother, who was a Scotsman. Mm-hmm. He wanted him to be his captain, because if it was Errol Flynn's captain, he'd be very discreet. And so, but he was not an American citizen, and this was an American flag vessel that had to have an American captain. And I went to a friend of my dad's, Molly Strum, who was the customs collector in New York, and she said, I can't help you but to go to the Coast Guard in the next building downtown Manhattan. And I went into the Coast Guard, and they sat at a counter, and they said, absolutely not, you cannot do this. You cannot have a foreign captain. It has to be amenable to the laws of the United States, and you can't have a Scotsman doing this. And I'm about to leave, and a man sitting at the desk in the back of the room says, Counselor. He walks over to me and says, your name is Rayfiel. I said, yes, sir. He says, you are related to the judge? I said, well, I'm proud to say I'm his son and grandson. He says, come with me. He takes me back to his desk. He says, when they enacted the Motorboat Registration Act, and all the boats have two numbers, NY or FL for Florida, NY for New York, they made a mistake in the embossed copy of the bill. No matter what Congress passes, when the bill is published, that's the law, even if it's wrong. And it said all vessels from 9 feet, it's supposed to say to 60 feet, must be registered. It didn't say that. It said all boats from 9 feet. He said, you could register your 97-foot boat, yacht, as a motorboat. You can have anybody you want. You could have your Aunt Tilda. Well, I went back, and we registered the boat as a motorboat. And I was a hero to Huntington to Hartford. Nothing legal, but little things like
Sure.
that. And one more for Richard Burton. When Richard did Camelot, and we had represented Rex Harrison and set up My Fair Lady for him, we wanted to do the same for Richard. He wasn't singing, but he was sort of, his voice was so great, he just talked the words and that was enough. But he had to have a dressing room on the stage, next to the stage, not upstairs, not downstairs. He had to be immediately adjacent to the stage. And it had to have a telephone that he could hear whenever someone called him. Well, it was getting close to production, and they knew that if the telephone went off during the play, it would drive people crazy. But he would not hear of anything. And someone said, you know, you can have lights now. The telephone can ring. Instead of it being heard, it's seen. There's a light that flashes. So they called AT&T, and they said, yes, we'll do that. It will be 2 months. And we said, no, it can't. No, it'll be 2 months because we have so many other calls. And I called Congressman Keogh. And I said, Congressman, do you think you can do something about this? An hour later, there was an AT&T truck at the theater, and there were lights. And well, those are things, you know, your client loves you for that. It's nothing legal, but it's the things you can do that make them happy. And that's what I was able to do. It was wonderful.
Wonderful, your book is, and it's titled, Where the Hell is Desilu? And what I found interesting is that title comes from just a great deal of self-esteem that you had of working your way, and you're at Hollywood looking for a job and
Yes.
responding to an ad, not Desilu's ad.
No, on the contrary, United Artists Television, not friends, but people I was having lunch with, 2 lawyers from William Morris, the head of the legal department for features and TV in the Brown Derby in Beverly Hills. But they said that they couldn't hire me because I had too much experience and had to be paid too much money. All their young lawyers would scream if they paid me what they had to pay me. They thought, I wish, you know.
Yeah.
But they said, you know, but our client, United Artists Television, they're looking for a house counsel, a resident counsel. I said, well, where are they? And it was right down at the corner, Beverly Drive and Wilshire Boulevard. I knew the president of the company because Matthau and I had tried to get a pilot done for a TV show where Walter plays a tugboat captain in New York. It never happened, but I knew the head of the company. I didn't even know he'd be in town, but I went to their offices. It was right down the block. I went upstairs, I walk in, and there is Frank Reel, the man who was a man from New York I knew. And he looked at me, he says, Howard, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm your new lawyer. He said, we just hired a lawyer. He said, lunchtime, and it was half an hour away. He said, we just hired a lawyer. I'm so sorry. I'd love to have you, but we hired him. I said, where did you hire him from? He said, Desilu. I said, where the hell is Desilu? I didn't know when Desilu was. And they took me to the window and said, you go up Beverly Drive to Melrose Avenue, you go Melrose to Gower. And I did. I parked the car. I walked in, there was one woman at the desk there. Now there are 6 policemen who arrest you if you go in. They go through they take your shoes off, they go through your bags. It's like getting in an airport. Yeah. But I just said, hello. They had told me the name of the man, Bernie Weitzman, who was the business affairs vice president. And I said, I want to see Mr. Weitzman. She said, oh, just come inside and go down the block. And I went in, I said hello to his secretary. And I said, I want to see Mr. Weitzman. Walked right in. He was surprised. The guy. I said, hi, I'm Howard Rayfiel from New York. He said, hi. I said, I'm your new resident counsel. He said, we have a resident counsel. I said, you think you have a resident counsel. I got the job. I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I wouldn't know where I'd be. But that's the fortuitous, wonderful things about life. That little momentary thing, good things happen, and you never dream of what the consequences will be. That you're writing a book called Where the Hell is Desilu? But I think it's just wonderful.
Well, I guess it's chutzpah. You know.
Yeah, that's the word. That's the word.
Through that experience of being there, and your timeline was 63 through
72.
72.
We have 67. We sold the company to Gulf and Weston, and I was going to write. And I wrote a couple of things, some TV formats that sold with a partner, one of the Bernie Fine, who was one of the creators of Hogan's Heroes. But Lucy asked me to come back and run her company. And it wasn't just counsel, because she was acting and Gary was playing golf. Somebody had to run the company.
Yeah.
And so she asked me to do that, and you can't say no to Lucy. You really can't.
What did you know about her before you walked in as counsel to Desilu?
Well, but everybody knew, she was the wonderful scatterbrain, crazy wife of a crazy guy. They were I Love Lucy, and that's what you really knew about them. But I learned that she was a lot more than that.
Yeah. What did you learn?
Well, she was a woman of, first of all, of incredible comedic talent as her acting. If you see with some of the scenes that are without voice, where she's just playing a robot, for example, you see this remarkable ability to make you laugh, to derive comedy from a very simple thing. But also a woman who it was an era in the 60s, Vietnam War, trying to bring up a couple of children with Desi, whom she couldn't live with but had trouble living without, and loved for the rest of her life, but with a man who is now a father figure, but who was, once Irving Mansfield, who was the husband of Jacqueline Suzanne, who was then a major writer of sort of paper novels, but a big star. Gary was looking at his Rolls Royce, which was like Gary's, and Gary had many of them. And Irving came to him and patted him on the back and said, "I know how you feel, Gary. I'm in the wife business too." So it was hard for Gary to be Mr. Lucille Ball. But so she had to deal with that, handle that, make him feel like a responsible man, and then bring up two children in a community where there wasn't just wealth, but there was celebrity. And the combination of those two things is very hard on young people. Yesterday, Wanda Clark, her marvelous secretary, dear friend to this day, those of us who survive are all dear friends. She talked about Lucy giving them $5 a week. That was their allowance. And even then, that was very little for a kid in those situations. The Beverly Hills High School parking lot, our daughter Amy and son Victor attended Beverly High. One of the parking lots had old Nissans, they were called Datsuns then, and Volkswagens, and the Chevys and Fords, and they were the teachers' cars. And the students were Lamborghinis and Maseratis and Ferraris, kind of like Formula One at a high school. But that's what the kids had. So it was very hard to give them some sense of living on this earth. And it was hard for her too. She ultimately put them in the show when she did Here's Lucy, to have them near her. It was very important to do that. But she was a concerned mother, and she was, I use the word liberal in the best sense. We integrated the studio. The studios were totally white except for the janitorial staff in those days. I represented Lena Horne, who's a dear friend. Couldn't get her what we call spectaculars then. Now there were specials, and I don't know what they're called now, because she was black. And God help us if Frank Sinatra kissed the cheek on screen, they blackened the screen. It was that way. And Lucy was just the opposite. Her shows were the extras sitting at the next table in a restaurant, sometimes would be black or Hispanic. And people see that, and they have to reason that if it's okay for Lucy, it's okay for me. And the person we put at the desk walking into the studio was a black woman. And people saw that and accepted that. And on things like this, Paul Winchell became a very dear friend of mine, is doing her show. It was a Mel Torme show. Mel was starring, but Paul was in it with him. And he and a black man are playing chess or checkers, I don't remember which. And Paul is wearing a pair of glasses. And they're watching, he's watching the board. It's not even the center part of the scene, but they keep cutting to this. He's looking at the board, and he almost makes a move and doesn't. And then finally he makes a move. He takes off his glasses, and he hands them to the black man, who puts them on, and now he's going to make a move. That says more than all the speeches in the world.
Sure, absolutely.
And we are, in those respects, all alike.
Yeah.
And she knew that. And it was very good because, again, the company was a real United Nations. Her accountant was the Cherokee Indian, her secretary. Her accountant was Patrick Pan, who's Chinese. Her cue card people were Bonnie McNulty, an Irishman, and Carlos Acosta, a Hispanic. They were called Chicanos, and it was from Mexico. It was just a remarkable organization, and we all respected one another's differences. We respected the ethnicity. Sam Giardino, the head painter, was Italian, but all Americans, and and it comes from the top. If you don't have that today, I don't know what they have, but they don't have that. In Hollywood, you see the TV shows and you see there's a difference. Every family is dysfunctional. And with all of the craziness in I Love Lucy, they were not dysfunctional.
Yeah.
They loved one another and cared for one another. And we live our lives very much in reflection of what we see on the screen. And early on it was from movies. And I remember you come out of a Humphrey Bogart movie, you're 9 years old, you take the cigarette out of your mouth, you don't have one, you throw it on the ground and you stamp it out, because that's what Bogey did.
Yeah, yeah.
And people learn, they don't, I mean, it's automatic. They just want to emulate that. And she knew that too. She would talk, there were very few people, Eddie Murphy does this, and a few other performers, they're willing to look at the camera. Now, normally the camera doesn't exist in cinema and even in television. Well, you're not there. That's a room with Lucy and Desi and maybe the Frawleys, but there's no camera there. But most performers are afraid to look at the camera because they're afraid people will think they're looking at them, the audience, and they go over the camera or under the camera. Lucy was willing to mug right to the camera because she wasn't mugging for you. She was mugging. It was what she was doing. And it's a comedic art. It's a craft and an art, and it was marvelous. But she had a real sense of humor about many things. When her kids did this show at the airport, most of our shows were 3 camera, of course, but that was our location was 1 camera. And we're at the LAX, Los Angeles International Airport, at the restaurant building. And the villains are chasing, 2 villains are chasing Lucy and Gail Gordon. And the kids, there's a wagon with cream pies on it. And the kids are throwing the cream pies at the villains, and like the old silent movies, and they're hitting them in the face, and they're slipping on them and all that stuff, and they're saving Lucy and Gail. And we had directors, but Lucy very much directed the shows. And she has this 1 camera, and she wants the camera to show. There's 1 shot of the guys getting their faces hit and slipping, but then she wants shot after shot of the kids throwing the pies. And I always tried not to intercede. And even though as an executive, most of them used to stay in their offices, I was with them on location and wherever they were, because I was part of it, part of the team. And I called her aside. I said, honey, there's I said, the people getting pies in the face, as we did in silent movies, is very funny, and it can be wonderful. There's nothing really funny about 2 teenagers throwing pies. And she said, when they're my kids, there is. And very, true and very funny. And so she had that kind of sense of humor. Also, quite frankly, it became hard. It became hard later on, carrying the burden. The creative team didn't move with the times. They were old timers. This is partly because of Gary's influence. They were old friends of his, but their circle of friends was all the old timers. And I once said to Desi, he's 15 years old, and I said, Desi Jr., I said, who are your best friends? And he thought for a minute, and he said, well, Jack Carter, Jen Murray, Milton Berle. I thought he was kidding. I said, no, seriously, who are your best friends? And he said, Jack Carter, Jen Murray, Milton Berle. That's the lives that they lived in.
Yeah.
And we were talking automobiles and the life of the kids in Beverly Hills. I was overheard them his partner in Dino, Desi, and Billy was Dean Martin's son, Dino, who was then killed in a National Guard air crash. But Dino was 16, Desi was 15. And Dino drove, Desi didn't drive yet. 16, the kids got cars. He said, and I'll tell you something about the car Desi got. But Dino said to him, Desi, what are you going to do for the hiatus? We stopped shooting for 2 weeks at Christmas time. And he said, a 15-year-old kid, he says, well, I'm going to Waikiki, Hawaii. I'll lie on the beach for a couple of weeks. And he said, well, the family going with you? He said, no, I'm going by myself. A 15-year-old kid. And he said to Dino, what are you going to do? He says, well, there's a yellow Lamborghini for sale in Amsterdam. I'm going to go buy it. And, that's the life. And very sadly, and there were sad times, there are a lot of sweet stories, a lot of bittersweet stories. When Desi turned 16, I said to Lucy, what are you going to give him for his 16th birthday? And she said, an Aston Martin. It was a very expensive English sport car. And I said, honey, please don't do that. And I said, I got Eileen a Mustang. The second year the Mustangs were made, I think. I got Eileen a little Mustang convertible, and she loves it. Why don't you get him one of those? A couple of years, get him maybe a little bigger car, a little better car. When he's 21, he'll inherit some $1 million. He can buy what he pleases. And she looked at me and she said, how can I show him that I love him? And she's Miss America. It was hard for them to show the kids because they had it all. Diana Barrymore and the Barrymore family, a famous theatrical family, was a client of ours. And she had lived with that problem. And she wrote a book called Too Much, Too Soon, and then killed herself. Yeah. And the kids of so many children of so many of those families either died or became drug users, serious drug users. It was really, really horrible. Our son played opposite Debbie Reynolds' daughter in, I forget the name of one of the musicals, at the Beverly High. And they had a rehearsal, and a very good English teacher who was their director. But through the entire rehearsal, Debbie Reynolds sat in the front row of the audience and said, oh, no, don't do it that way. She drove the director crazy. She had to direct her daughter in the show. Well, how can then you be just an ordinary kid?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's very, very sad, but it's just the life that they live. And but Lucy wouldn't do that. She wouldn't dream of doing that. But the kids had peers, and it's just. So I say there were sad elements in their lives, and they were growing older. They were growing, as I say, the material reflected. It wasn't like the Dick Van Dyke material, the Mary Tyler Moore material. I hope the Lucy Desi people don't mind my saying that she used to throw the scripts across the room at the very end. She would read some of the scripts and literally throw them across the room. She was unhappy, but because of the way it was set up with all their friends, and the writers were the old, they were wonderful writers when they wrote for Jack Benny, when they wrote for Bob Hope. But now it's 20 years later, 25, 30, they themselves had become jaded, and they didn't have the spark that the Mary Tyler Moore people had, the Van Dyke people, and a few others. And it's very sad, and she couldn't get out of that because of the way they lived, because of all their friends, and because she was comfortable with these writers, and she didn't know the new experience. She didn't know how to go about finding these people. I went to the agents. I said, look, we pay $3,500 a script. Then it was a lot of money, more than any other show in Hollywood. And the Writers Guild scale was $1,250. I'll give your new writers $1,250 for a script. If we use it, I'll pay you the 35. I'll bring them up to the 35. We would have found the new writers for that, and we could get 3 for the price of 1. Get 3 writers. And our head writer, Milt Josephsberg, turned it down. He says, I won't allow you to do that. Not won't allow, but we shouldn't do that. And and Lucy was trapped by that. And it's a pity because there was a new approach to humor. Not the stuff again today, but there was an interim period when those shows, the chemistry of Mary Tyler Moore and all her people, and Ed Asner and Gavin MacLeod and Ted Knight, and I mean it was just marvelous. And Van Dyke with Rosemary and I have a problem with names. Maury Amsterdam, Carl Reiner, who had created the show, Electricity going there, as she and Desi had, as she and Vivian had. But now she had the kids, and it wasn't the same. You can't have the same chemistry with the kids, and they have to bring in guest stars, and then they would play off them and Margaret. I mean, and wonderful players, wonderful people. But it was a one-time thing, and the writers didn't have that feeling, and it was very, very sad.
Well, guest stars, speaking of guest stars, you spent some time on one we all remember is Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton.
Ah, yes.
And that's a unique story.
Well, I've talked about Richard in his dressing room, and he used to hang out in my nightclub in New York, the back room, BAQ. We were fancy, the back room. But he one night after the show, Thursday night, Cleo Smith, who was Lucy's cousin but known as her sister, always treated her sister, who was the producer, said to Lucy, you're going to dinner at Mateo's with Gary, as they used to do most every week. And she said, yeah, but I'm really tired. I'd like to go home. The British consul invited us to his home on June Street, just a few blocks away. And he's throwing a party for the Burtons, and he invited us, but I don't want to go. I'm just too tired. You have to go. It's a command performance. You're such a big star in England, but you must go. So she dragged herself and Gary to the party. Next morning at the crack of dawn, I get a call from New York, the law firm, one of the partners. Richard got drunk last night and made a terrible mistake. I said, what was that? He says, he told Lucy how much he loved the shows, and he and Elizabeth will be guest stars in the show. And he didn't call them Dick and Liz, or you were banished to the colonies. They were Elizabeth and Richard. And he said, he doesn't want to do that. You know, what should he do? And I said, Aaron, it would make my career. And it almost cost me my career, but it would make my career. And so he said, okay, he'll do it. And he did it. Now, $2,500 a piece. They were getting $1 million a movie each then, and stars were getting $250,000. They got $1 million each. And we paid them $2,500 a piece, but gave them each, they didn't do anything really together. Married twice, but they really didn't live together. Yeah. And so we gave them each a bungalow at the Beverly Hills Hotel. They brought another couple, Eamon Williams' son, Brooke Williams, and his wife and child. We didn't even know. We flew them in from Puerto Vallarta, and these people come out of the airplane with them. And he had to have a role in the show, Richard said. But we set them up. And we had to give them dressing rooms. Richard had to be right next to the stage, and we gave him a moto. Elizabeth, we wanted to give her the best. There was Paramount owned it now. We were tenants of Paramount then. They owned the Barbara Streisand dressing room, which had been built for her when she did On a Clear Day. 42 feet, Madame Recamier sofas, smoke glass mirrors, spectacular. 2 entrances. And it was the Barbara Streisand dressing room, except that you could not call it the Barbara Streisand dressing room. Elizabeth Taylor would not set foot in the Barbara Streisand dressing room. So everyone was sworn to secrecy. It was the Elizabeth Taylor dressing room. She thought they built it just for her. And okay, she's using it. She drives to the studio in the morning. She and Richard have separate limousines, each of them, and separate security guards. And there are 200 people out there, fans of hers, with statues and paintings and scrolls and all kinds of things. And it hurt Lucy very deeply because she wasn't a movie star. She had made 5, 10 times as many movies as Elizabeth Taylor had. But for some reason, she had not become a movie star. It's royalty. It's very special. And Elizabeth obviously was. So they get to, they come in Monday morning for the reading. We would read on Monday, block on Tuesday, and rehearse a little, and rehearse then Wednesday, Thursday we'd have a dress rehearsal and shoot the show. In those days we shot at night. And they're being in 9 o'clock in the morning. First thing I get a call from Elizabeth, one of her entourage, and all kinds of young people with her. And he says, Howard? I said, yes. He says, at the dressing room. I said, how does she like it? It's lovely, but the bourbon is a Jack Daniel's green label. I said, what the hell is green label? I never heard of that. And it's only sold in some states. And he says, I don't know, but it's green, it's not black label. So I said, let me check with the prop guy, Kenny Westcott. I called Kenny. I said, Kenny, there's champagne. You gave us champagne. He said, yeah, 2 bottles of Dom Perignon, one at each end, in ice. I said, what's this green label? He says, I saved $2 a bottle. I said, Kenny, you got a $100 bottle of champagne at one end and a $100 bottle at the other, and you saved $2 on the bourbon? Get in the black label bourbon. So they got the bourbon. And all through, there were just constant little problems. Richard, he mumbles his lines. First of all, he walked through the whole thing. But he mumbles his lines. And Lucy is a cue card person, and she has farsighted. She can see a cue card 100 feet away. And Richard's mumbling, and Lucy's saying, Richard, speak up, speak up. He's a Shakespearean actor. Speak up, speak up. And Elizabeth calls me over. She says, if she says that one more time, it's back to the hotel for both of us. So I talked to Lucy, and she has to live with that. Of course, Richard learns. He did blow one line, and Cecil Smith, Cleo's husband, who's one of the Hollywood press corps that were all of them were in the show, he corrects him on camera. Richard says that when they look at the diamond ring, which we'll talk about later, he says, oh, she got in a Cracker Jack barrel. And on camera, Cecil said, you mean box? And you couldn't reshoot the scene. It was just too many people in it, and we had to leave it. It goes out that way now in syndication. But it was a tough battle. And Lucy, when it was over, Lucy, we sat after the dress rehearsal. Lucy and I were sitting in the director's chair. She was tired. We were just sitting watching them work on the set and clean up the props and everything. And now this was the huge diamond ring that Richard had bought for Elizabeth, the Cartier diamond, the biggest thing you ever saw in your life. And Lucy says, we're not going to use the ring. We're going to use a paste, a copy of it. I thought she was crazy. I said, what do you mean? She says, no. And she just was that unhappy with Elizabeth, you know, as a superstar. And she said, we're not going to use the ring. And I turned to her, I said, honey, lady, I said, with all due respect, I said, they don't want to see Elizabeth. They don't want to see you. They want to see the ring. And she said, go to hell, we'll use the ring. And I used to speak the truth to her. Almost any of the other people would say, okay, we won't use the ring. She's the chairman of the board. She's the star of the super. I mean, she's Lucy. But she was wrong. And somewhere inside she knew she was wrong. And I could evoke that in her. She had that respect. I was 18 years her junior, but I was a father figure in many ways. And she knew that if I said that to her, that was right. Because I would never lie to her. And a lot of people didn't just lie. They just fibbed to her because it made life easier for them. And they thought she wanted to hear those things. So we do the show. And the wonderful scene where she shows the ring to Lucy's hand is showing it. And it's beautiful. We finish the show. As we're walking out, next door, Chasen's in the next stage where the dressing rooms are. Chasen's is catering a huge dinner party. This is a Hollywood, cream of Hollywood. The audience, 300 people, the top people in the whole city. And unlike the usual week when we just had nice people, fans. And Jerry says, Jerry Paris, who had directed the show, who had done the Dick Van Dyke shows, he directed them and was in them. He was the best director in Hollywood. Gary says, how many shows we got him for? I said, well, I had to hire him for 6 to do this one. And he said, fire him. I said, Gary, I got 5 more shows with this guy. He had done the warm-up also, and Gary used to do a pretty sad warm-up, but he had done a brilliant one, and Gary was a little jealous. So Gary said, fire him. I had to fire him. We became dear friends. But Gary said that he was the executive vice president and all that, and we fired him. And we went to dinner. And at one table, Lucy and Richard and half the Hollywood press corps sitting for dinner, and we're drinking a bit. And at another table, Gary and Elizabeth and I with the rest of the Hollywood press corps. And it's a gossipy, inbred town. And Elizabeth says, you guys haven't seen my dressing room. It's been off limits to everyone. Come on, I'll show it to you. That's fine. Get up, we walk in. She should go in one entrance, and they're delighted. They see this wonderful, wonderful dressing room. And we come back to the table. And one time Lucy had said to me, Howard, what's the problem with Gary? I said, it centers around his mouth. And she said, we've never had this conversation. Okay. And Gary says to Elizabeth, you like the dressing room? She says, I love it. He said, it's yours. Aside from the fact that it's the Barbara Streisand dressing room and we don't own it, it's yours. Her eyes light up, and they're purple. They're so beautiful. She says, oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. And here's the Hollywood press. They're taking notes. And I said, Gary, please. No, it's hers. I said, please don't do that. He says, it's yours. We'll ship it to your house. Where do you live? She says, Gstaad. That's in Switzerland. He thinks it's just south of Santa Barbara. This will ship it to your house. I said, Gary, it's in Switzerland. And she's so thrilled she's going to have the dressing room up there in Switzerland, this marvelous dressing room. And he says, we can ship it to Switzerland. I said, we can ship it anywhere in the world. But Gary, so now, Lucy calls me, 7 o'clock in the morning. And says, Howard, did Gary give Elizabeth the dressing room last night? I said, yes, he did. She said, no, he didn't. I said, well, yes, he did. No, he didn't. I said, no, you don't understand me. He did. And she says, you don't understand me. He didn't, and hangs up. And it took us 6 months. To get the law firm helped. We took us 6 months to get Richard, who didn't want to be involved and on our side, and it took him 6 months to get Elizabeth to give up the thought of suing us, and it really took a year until it was over about the dressing room. And but then a light went out outside of Lucy's dressing room in the Paramount lot. A light blew out, and she called the electrics department, the maintenance department, and asked them to fix the light. They must have thought it was somebody impersonating her, just kidding, and they never fixed the light. So she called me and said, Howard, I can't get them to fix the light. I called them up, they never fixed the light. So she said, let's get out of here, we'll move. I said, good, Universal is perfect, just the right place for you. They got a great sound stage that they used to use for Jack Benny, and their television is down, they'll be thrilled to have us. We can make a fabulous deal. And she said, okay, but our outside counsel who owed Warner Brothers for a favor said, no, we'll move to Warner Brothers. I didn't want to move to Warner Brothers, but I had to take a look and give them a chance. Our studio manager had, when we sold the company to Paramount, he had moved to Warner Brothers and was their studio manager. So I go there, and he shows me around. His name is Gail Gedham, and he shows me the stage, and it's quite nice. Back lot, wardrobe, construction, all of the departments. And then he takes me to pièce de résistance to see the dressing room. And it's a lovely, beautiful dressing room. And it's, I figure, well, I'm lost, and he says, last minute, he says, and Howard, it's the Elizabeth Taylor dressing room. He doesn't know what a favor he did to me. I race over the mountain back to Hollywood, and I tell Lucy, the stage and the back lot and all of the departments, I said, it's great. And your dressing room, it's great, honey. And it's the Elizabeth Taylor dressing room. She says, make a deal at Universal.
No.
And that's how we moved to Universal.
Wouldn't have anything to do with it.
It would not have anything to do with it. And we got to Universal. When we opened our office, and it was a marvelous arrangement there. She came in to see our various offices, and she came into mine, and they're beautiful offices. And she's a big picture of her that I have to this day in the living room, autographed to us. And a picture of Gary, picture of little Lucy, which we called her then, and Desi Jr., picture of Richard, autographed to me, and a picture of Elizabeth autographed. And she looks at the picture, turns around, and walks out, and never set foot in the office again. Really, nothing to do with me, but she couldn't set foot in the office again. Very strange. And it didn't affect our relationship or anything, but she couldn't, just that I had the picture there. She couldn't accept, I'm sorry to say. The dressing room loomed in the background. She, later in her career, she was doing a TV movie, and she was at Fox, and she wanted them to get that dressing room for her. She felt that would be good. After it was, Elizabeth had it, now it's Lucy's dressing room.
Right.
And they rented it from Paramount, and they put it on a flatbed and took it over to Fox. 2 forklift trucks picked up the dressing room, and they cracked in the middle and crashed to the ground and were just completely destroyed. And people, felt that her career may have been destroyed, but it really wasn't, because we're here today because her career goes on, and we see the shows over and again, and we love Lucy, and we all do love Lucy, so it goes forever, dressing room or not.
Interestingly enough, in your book, you do talk about there's a phobia of Lucy's, the fear of financial failure.
Yeah, later on, there was that. An example, we used to give every one of our employees a raise. If something happened that was fortuitous, a baby was born, a kid went to college, you automatically got a raise, just to, to protect, to give you a little extra. And it wasn't a lot of money, it was $25, or $50, but in those days, that was a nice raise. And Gary bought his 4th Rolls Royce, and this one from Harry Carl, Debbie Reynolds' husband, a black Rolls Royce convertible that had gold ornaments on it. And I would put through the raises, I signed all those things, but Gary, because he was the executive producer, executive vice president, would sign or initial the thing, check it off. Once it comes back and it says no, disapproved, I can't believe it, But if he says that, that's the law. I mean, I always paid respect to his office, and if he said no, it was no. And I thought I'd have to tell Kenny Westcott, we just couldn't give him the raise. I get a call from the stage, and I knew all of the people. I was an executive, but I was close to all of the people. We were all dear friends. One of the guys says, Gary just drove on the stage with his, they had 12 cars then, 4 Rolls Royces. He just drove on the stage with his new Rolls Royce with the gold ornaments to show the guys. I couldn't believe my ears. And I called his office, and Tori was the secretary. I said, have Gary call me as soon as he gets in. And we had a hotline, And 2 minutes later he calls, what's the problem? I said, Gary, you were just on stage with your 4th Rolls Royce with gold ornaments to show the guys? He said, yeah, boy, they loved it. I said, it cost us $25 a week. He said, what do you mean? He says, you can't do that and deny a guy a $25 raise. And the raises stayed on because of that. They got to be afraid. When it was Desilu, stockholders would get up at the meeting and say, I bought Desilu at 21. It's 9 now, and I don't care because I love Lucy. But you try to do that today at General Motors and see what happens. But they owned G&W stock, which she sold the company, and she owned just over 50% of it. She was then a lot of money. I think it was $14 million or something like that, 13 or 14 million. The stock went down. Funny, I know nothing about the stock market. My father used to also, just avoided it like the plague. We just wanted to have nothing to do with it, but I was at one of the periodic meetings we had with our outside counsel and tax counsel. And for some reason, I said, the stock was at 58. And I said, we should get rid of the stock. It's too high, and I don't think it's... and again, I know nothing about this. And they said, you're crazy. And I was with my production manager, Bill Maginetti. And I said, yeah, I just think there's something wrong. They thought I knew something that they didn't know about the stock. And they got worried. and said, well, we'll hedge a little bit, we'll hedge. And they called Lucy, and they said, Lucy, we're going to sell a quarter of the Gulf and Western shares. And they suggested that. She said, they said, fine. She said, fine. They made a call and sold it right on the spot. They sold it at 58. It went up to 58 and 5/8 and went down to 9. Gary never forgave me that we sold it at 58, not 58 and 5/8. I really mean that. But they were really worried about that. Had no need to be, and it affected a lot of things in their lives. Very strange. But again, one of the problems with the people, the celebrities in Hollywood, was the fear that they would lose the celebrity quality. She was not afraid of dying, but she was afraid of growing old. Mm-hmm. And that was part of this whole thing. When her leg was broken, and she was skiing, but a young skier skied into her and broke her leg. When that happened, I have a memory problem, forgive me, but sometimes I get so many things in my mind that I really forget the train of thought. Forgive me because what we were talking about, her fear. Sure. I called, it was my birthday, and I went over to the house and started arranging things that had to be done for her. My mother had died, and she had a black walking stick, a Malacca walking stick, which she gave to Eileen, and we gave it to Lucy, and she used that, brought it over to the house. When she came back, she used that. But I had to handle the future. She was going to do the film Mame. Could she do it? There were a lot of things that had to be arranged, and they had a young doctor wanted the glory of setting her leg, and he said it incorrectly. And Denton Cooley from Texas sent a team of orthopedic people to redo it for her. All these things had to be arranged. And Gary was pretty much at a loss. He was at home in Beverly Hills. And I called a doctor, and I said, will she be able to do the picture? And he said, how? And he says, I couldn't tell you this, but I will now. She's been taking all these imported European drugs to keep her young. Mm-hmm. And they keep her from healing. They keep the cells from developing and maturing, and they keep her from healing, so she may not be able to do the picture. As it turned out, she was able to do the picture. Perhaps she shouldn't have, but she did the picture. And but they were, it was a great fear that she had, that she would become old. The only time we ever had, not words, but she was, I think, displeased with me. And remember, sometimes I had to give her bad news. I think I told you, if I may just intercede, when, well, I won't tell you the whole story yet, but when she wanted, no, let's wait, I'll tell you a little while. She was being made up for the show. And it used to take a long time at the end to make her up. And Lee Greenaway, who was a makeup man, was working on her. And I watched him. And I said something I had no business saying with him there. And I foolishly did. And I said, honey, she was 60 then. I said, honey, you're a beautiful 40-year-old woman, but you'll never be 18 again. And she dismissed me. Drives on, you know, it's a summon. It's a sad story.